I have never been fond of the Larson family gatherings, yet this year attendance was unavoidable. Dressed simply in a navy blue outfit, I found myself near the bar inside Uncle Henry's grand estate, quietly taking in the loud laughter, the endless compliments, and the proud looks exchanged as if everyone were auditioning for the lead in a prestigious play. Crystal chandeliers soaring above reflected against mirrored walls, crafting a blinding and almost overwhelming atmosphere. The aroma of luxury perfumes blended with the shine of polished walnut floors, making me feel like I had stepped into a museum dedicated to so-called prestige. Those with Larson blood always knew how to transform any event into a display of dominance. Just as I raised my champagne flute to my lips, Aunt Margaret's voice sliced through the classical music sharply as if with scissors. "Vanessa, my goodness, I barely recognized you. Still a secretary at that place? What was it again? Apex Consulting?" I smiled, my gaze steady even though my heart remained calm but firm. "Executive assistant, Auntie. And yes, still at Apex." She lifted an eyebrow, a familiar gesture signaling her impending critique. "Well, haven't you moved on to a proper company yet? You should really think about it. You know, you might achieve so much more if you made better use of your time." I said nothing, not because I lacked desire to respond, but simply due to how accustomed I was to remarks like hers. In their world, women either married influential men or filled supportive roles at most. Always standing by men, you know. Another voice joined in, confident and arrogant. It was Alex, my cousin, recently promoted to deputy executive director at his father's company just 2 months ago. "If you ever want a real career, I can speak to Dad. Our legal team needs someone to prepare contracts." I smiled gently as I took another sip. Had Alex known that I had just approved a restructuring agreement worth $38 million last week, he probably would have kept quiet. "Thanks, but I'm satisfied with my current position." Alex sneered. "Well, fine. Just keep in mind, stability does not equal success." That phrase was obviously learned from some leadership course for freshly minted executives. I stayed silent and instead thought about a recent email from my company's communications department reminding me to prepare for an interview with Forbes Business Weekly. My gaze wandered around the room where my relatives proudly talked about construction deals, financial ventures, and investment plans. Most were men, all dressed in navy suits and expensive timepieces. The few women present were mostly wives or girlfriends dressed to impress, yet no one mentioned their professional accomplishments. The Larsons never hid their preference for men. It seemed almost ingrained into their very lineage. Women in this family were only acknowledged when they stayed behind the scenes. A wife with social poise, a daughter with a spotless reputation, or a reliable secretary, nothing beyond that. I once tried to prove that I was capable of more, but the year I graduated, with an MBA from Wharton earned with honors, all I received from my family was just a bouquet. No card, no special dinner to celebrate. When I presented a plan to revolutionize small businesses through agile consulting at a family gathering 7 years ago, they burst into laughter. "Consulting?" Uncle Henry said loudly enough for the maid carrying drinks to hear. "Vanessa, leave that kind of work to the big companies. You should be focusing on settling down." That evening, I left Uncle Henry's mansion with a single purpose in mind. I was determined to quietly build my own empire, one day forcing them to take notice. I chose the name Apex Solutions because it symbolized the peak I aimed to reach. It all began with just me and an old laptop inside a rented office above a shoe repair shop in Milwaukee. But I had what they lacked: a distinct vision, a precise strategy, and a restructuring method that large firms hadn't dared to attempt. 7 years later, Apex has grown into a recognized name in corporate recovery. Yet to the Larsons, I am still merely Secretary Vanessa. I gazed at the glass in my hand, light reflecting on its thick edge reminding me of every occasion I had been undervalued. I finished my drink, set the glass down, and smiled. They never realized the secretary they looked down upon had prevented several huge acquisition deals they assumed were already theirs. And tonight, as they eagerly chatted about fresh contracts, I awaited just one moment, a chance for someone to accidentally mention my name. The name Apex. Once that moment came, I did not need to utter a single word. All I had to do was smile and let the reality gradually reveal itself. That chilly winter evening remains vivid in my memory. It was the night when every ounce of faith I held in family shattered completely. I was only 26 years old then, less than a year past finishing my MBA. Driven by youthful enthusiasm, I was convinced that if I communicated my ideas with clarity, I could persuade them, the leaders of the Larson family, that my proposal was not only viable, but had the power to transform the future of small business. Consulting. I had prepared with great care presentation slides, market analyses, business frameworks, a strategy spanning 3 years, everything safely saved on the black USB drive I had kept since college. I found myself in Uncle Henry's conference room where the gleaming mahogany cast back the soft yellow light, and I began my presentation. For the initial 10 minutes, their faces stayed neutral and polite. 10 minutes later, a quiet laugh slipped from Uncle Raymond, the one overseeing the family's real estate empire. By the 30th minute, Uncle Henry could no longer contain himself. "Vanessa, you are clever," he said, "but your ideas are unrealistic. Small business restructuring consulting? Who is going to trust someone like you? What experience do you have? You have never managed a company. That is why I am starting with small businesses. I have a plan to expand gradually by establishing strategic alliances with enough partners." His tone was icy. "If you truly want to work, come to my office next week. I will find you a position in the records room where you can start with the basics." The room grew quiet except for a faint laugh from my cousin Marcus, who had declared bankruptcy 3 times in 4 years, but was still regarded as hopeful. That evening, I left the mansion with a firm resolution. I would succeed on my own without relying on any of them. I began with the small savings I had gathered from years of part-time jobs and postgraduate scholarships. A modest room on the 3rd floor of an old building in Edgewater, Chicago, located right above a phone repair store, became the very first base of Larson Strategies. I picked this name instead of Apex because I wanted it to convey a sense of long-term insight and clarity like the stars in the night sky. At the beginning, there was no sign, no receptionist, no fancy office, just me, an old desk, and an unwavering confidence that I was on the right path. Every business plan for my initial client, a print shop struggling under heavy debt and high operational costs, was meticulously handwritten by me. They turned to me because they had no alternatives left. I dedicated nearly 2 months immersing myself in their financial records, attending every bank negotiation and renegotiating all supplier agreements. When their income increased by 19% in just 1 quarter, the name Larson Strategies started to spread within the local business community like an unverified rumor. I understood that to progress further, I had to remain under the radar. So I brought on board an old acquaintance, a trusted ally. I enlisted a corporate law specialist to serve as my legal representative. I completed all the paperwork as an independent consultant. I rejected every interview request. When clients arrived, I acted as the project assistant. After they left, I coordinated every plan. Every staff member I brought on board, from analysts to accountants, signed non-disclosure agreements. They had no idea I was the founder. They only recognized me as Vanessa, the person who ensured everything ran seamlessly. 3 years later, Orion had established 4 modest branches in Chicago, Minneapolis, Austin, and Denver. Although no one knew my identity, I had successfully secured agreements with 3 retail chains for a technology firm on the verge of collapse. I kept myself out of photographs, press conferences, and industry gatherings. Not because I feared exposure, but because I wanted to control every move personally. No spotlight distracted me, no handshake led me astray. I clearly recall one evening passing by the office after a late meeting. The glass door was still softly illuminated by the blue glow of the projector. A few papers were scattered across the conference table. I stopped to peer through the glass and caught sight of my reflection. Not the woman in a simple dress, quiet at a Larson family reunion, but someone steadily acquiring real influence, the power of insight, persistence, and strategy. None of my relatives were aware. To them, I remained Vanessa, the unmarried niece working as an assistant at some company. They had never encountered my name before. But quietly, I was assembling an empire, sturdy, consistent, and increasingly impossible to ignore. I was aware that the moment would arrive for them to recognize my true nature. 6 years following the launch of that very first modest office, Larson Strategies had risen to become a name that could not be overlooked in the realm of corporate restructuring. Yet, the reputation was not the end goal. The real key was how we worked discreetly, with precision, and most importantly, under the veil of anonymity. When the stock market began to waver, when family enterprises started to falter due to supply chain interruptions, and when large corporations detected avenues for acquisitions, that was the instant Larson became the name many business leaders reached out to as a last option. We never announced ourselves with loud advertising, nor did we engage in public relations booms, no CEO chat shows or magazine features. Everything originated through subtle recommendations from top executives. There exists a circle of specialists who avoid the spotlight, but if they accept your case, your company stands a chance to survive. This sense of confidentiality enabled us to remain unnoticed by opportunists, especially those at Larson Holdings. I uncovered a reality that was both harsh and somehow appropriate. The very firm managed by Uncle Raymond, the one who had previously dismissed my business plan, was spearheading the takeover of faltering family-run companies. They did not restructure. They dismantled, sold at low prices, and erased all traces. Consequently, I redirected my attention. I recruited a market research team focused on monitoring. Unexpected acquisitions unfolded throughout the United States. Sudden approaches, accompanied by lowball offers to buy out companies, contracts that left no public record. Among the names that emerged, several firms were on the brink of being absorbed by Larson Holdings. I kept this information to myself. There was no reason to spread the word. Instead, I proactively contacted those enterprises before my own family could intervene. A shipyard located in Portland, an electronic components producer in Ohio, and an organic cosmetics company in New Mexico were all involved. These were small businesses, bursting with potential but lacking direction and financial support. All of them were prepared to sell, believing they had no alternative. However, when they received an email from an unknown sender stating, "Let us examine your financial records before you commit to any agreement," nearly half agreed to meet. Following that meeting, the majority chose Orion as their partner. We did more than prevent their downfall. We presented them with a 90-day action plan involving operational restructuring, supplier contract renegotiations, cash flow management, and most importantly, developing a sustainable plan for at least the following 2 years. This plan was implemented by top-tier experts, handpicked and following the precise strategy I had outlined. With each successful case, Orion not only secured a substantial consulting fee, but also quietly derailed a hostile takeover attempt orchestrated by my own family. The most memorable was a deal in Seattle with a medical equipment manufacturer named Caldwell. Larson Holdings was putting instruments under intense pressure. I traveled there and personally attended the discussion. Still, holding the position of strategic assistant, I discreetly took notes, observed everything, and arranged documents right before the CEO. Nobody realized that every significant decision was being guided by me gradually through subtle hints delivered by the senior advisors I had trained. When I stepped out of that meeting room, the sky over Seattle had burst into rain. I stood beneath the shelter, gazing at the towering buildings illuminated by the city's lights. I was aware that somewhere in a luxurious office in Manhattan, Uncle Raymond was boiling with anger after discovering that his cherished deal had been quietly taken by an unseen competitor. Yet, they remained unaware it was me. To the employees, I was merely Vanessa from internal analysis. I never put my real name on any paperwork. Every message I sent came from a shared email account. Even the original founders were uncertain about who really led the company. I did not crave attention. All I needed was the certainty that with every action, every small company we saved, I was reclaiming something they had once refused to grant me. A decade went by and Orion Strategies expanded, opening branches in 11 cities, overseeing a restructuring portfolio exceeding 80 businesses. Still, nobody, not even my family, could connect my identity to the empire they had grown to fear but could not penetrate. I once believed secrecy was a shield. Now I realize it was a masterful plan, a flawless strategy. When my family realized there was an invisible force obstructing each of their steps, it could already be too late to turn back. The call arrived at 8 p.m. on Wednesday. I was examining the Southern Region expansion blueprint when Maya, my personal assistant, entered the room holding the internal phone. Her eyes shone with the urgency of what she had just found. Vanessa from Cressman Industries had sent an urgent alert. It appeared that Larson Holdings was attempting to coerce them into accepting a merger proposal within 72 hours. From what I knew, they had contacted Orion 2 weeks earlier. I glanced up and nodded subtly. This was exactly what I anticipated. Cressman stood as one of the few family-run companies left in Missouri, focusing on cutting-edge agricultural machinery. They were undergoing a financial overhaul, and Larson Holdings had detected their vulnerability as usual. Uncle Raymond and his tactical investment group were getting ready to execute their decisive strike. I rose and moved toward the large glass board in my office that tracked our prioritized deals with great attention. In the upper left section, the name Cressman was highlighted in orange. I picked up a marker and circled it deliberately. I told Maya to let them know I would attend the meeting in person and to set it for Saturday morning at the Chicago headquarters. Maya seemed hesitant and asked, "Are you going to make your presence known?" I confirmed with a nod. It was the moment. On Saturday morning, I entered the vast conference room on the 21st floor of the Orion Strategies building, ready to face what lay ahead. The Larson family headquarters were still thought by them to belong to a mid-level consulting company, not worth their notice. They had passed by this location countless times during investment gatherings and had even once sat in this very room, never realizing I had been here as well, acting as logistics coordinator. Today, everything felt different. I selected a sharply tailored slate gray suit, matched with a crisp white shirt featuring a high collar. It was not ostentatious, yet sufficient to command respect. Maya had already arranged all the files, documents, and a comprehensive summary of the merger conditions. My only task was to enter and make the decisive move. At 8:45 in the morning, the delegation from Larson Holdings arrived. Leading the group was Uncle Raymond, exuding his usual self-assured attitude, one hand resting in his suit pocket, his deep red tie vivid against a charcoal gray suit. Traveling with him were Alex, my cousin who now acted as a senior legal advisor, and Claire, another cousin who had refused my partnership offer 3 years ago when I proposed investing in her logistics startup. They did not immediately recognize me. To them, I remained the slightly obstinate niece from the Larson family, working at a place too insignificant to recall. Everything changed the moment I took the chair in the middle of the conference table, the one reserved for the highest-ranking member of Orion Strategies. The atmosphere instantly shifted. "Good morning. I am Vanessa Larson, founder and CEO of Orion Strategies," I announced evenly. "I will be leading today's meeting." Claire dropped her pen in surprise. Alex looked at me as if he were witnessing someone entirely new. Uncle Raymond, caught off guard for a moment, narrowed his eyes at me. "What is this? You are the CEO of Orion. That cannot be true. Perhaps because you have never truly seen me, just as you have never genuinely noticed any of the women in this family unless they were serving drinks or entertaining guests." Maya quietly stepped forward, placing folders on the table and handing them to each person. I met their gazes slowly and intentionally. "The documents before you detail Orion's suggested merger terms with Cressman Industries if you intend to continue negotiations. Otherwise, starting Monday, we will move forward with acquiring 35% of Cressman's shares, currently being privately sold with support from an international investment fund. The transaction will conclude in 10 days. Alex cleared his throat, attempting to regain control. "This is not legitimate. You cannot simply appear and alter the conditions like this." "I am not altering the conditions," I interrupted. "I am merely the only person here who knows the entire board." Uncle Raymond looked at me with a complex expression. "You have concealed this from us for 10 years. You are betraying your family." I chuckled, but there was no trace of humor. Betrayal? What family exactly? The one that mocked me during the meeting when I mentioned launching my own company, or when my name was only brought up as an example of a girl who failed. I rose, resting my hand gently on the folder before me. "I took your dismissal as a protective barrier, and from it, I created a business that does more than just endure. It is transforming the way companies are rescued. Not to be offloaded, but to be restored." I paused, my eyes fixed on Uncle Raymond. Present is your final opportunity to cooperate respectfully. If the family opts to pursue its strategy of acquisitions, then I will meet you on the stock market. With a subtle nod, I exited the meeting room, leaving behind shocked expressions, a lingering silence, and the quiet turn of a storm shifting direction. I did not immediately return inside. Instead, I stood by the glass corridor on the 21st floor, gazing down at the lively street beneath. The March breeze pierced through my heavy coat, yet I did not feel cold. In fact, my mind was clearer than ever. The look I had seen in Uncle Raymond's eyes a moment ago, uncertainty indeed, but also a trace of apprehension. Maya came up beside me holding a tablet. Claire was going over the contract again. Alex was on the phone with the legal team as well as Uncle Raymond. He was puzzling over how the niece he once called invisible had managed to put the entire family on the defensive. I smiled faintly, continuing to watch the city below. I had made up my mind to return. This contest was far from finished. When I opened the door again, the atmosphere had changed. Claire was no longer sitting upright. Alex, podkudit kak sovremeno imia, had loosened his tie and was nervously flipping through the documents. Uncle Raymond remained still with his arms crossed and an expression as hard as stone, yet his eyes darted around, searching for an escape. I calmly pulled up a chair and sat down, moving slowly with intention. I take it you are looking for a method to reclaim control, I said smoothly, as though starting a familiar internal briefing. Snapping my fingers to signal Maya, she handed me another folder. I extracted 3 documents and placed one in front of each person. These contained records of attempts Larson Holdings made over the last 3 years that ended abruptly for unclear reasons. Alex frowned while scrutinizing me. Claire began leafing through the pages. Uncle Raymond remained unmoved, as if he already anticipated the next step. I explained each case in detail. The Plymouth Textiles arrangement collapsed in the final moments after a consulting company presented a complete restructuring strategy that had boosted the firm's estimated worth by 23%. Noblecraft, a Texas-based furniture enterprise, was advised to alter their distribution system. Within half a year, their share price nearly doubled, significantly exceeding the initial buyout proposal. Anderson Robotics, a startup located in Denver, planned to accept $14 million. But following a confidential strategic consultation, they landed a $60 million manufacturing contract. I stopped briefly, letting a faint smile curl on my lips. There was a single thread they all shared. They were each approached, assessed, and reorganized by Orion Strategies, which means by me. Alex, podkudit kak sovremeno imia, dropped his pen. Claire shut her eyes for a moment. Uncle Raymond kept gazing at me. You disrupted a string of challenges, he said deliberately. No, I corrected him. I rescued the companies you aimed to eliminate, Claire whispered almost inaudibly. You have been present all along, hidden in the background, I nodded. Precisely. And the most fascinating part is none of you ever noticed. Why? Because I do not wear the executive uniform. Because I do not appear in magazines. Or because you never thought a young woman in this family could be someone important. Uncle Raymond clenched the armrest of his chair firmly. If you believe you can compel us to accept these conditions. No, I interrupted, meeting his gaze steadily. I am not forcing you. I am presenting a choice. I slid the merger contract closer. You can sign here, maintain your pride and a share of the financial benefit, or refuse and I will continue to buy the remaining shares openly on the market. Then, Orion will gain full control of Cresmont. No more negotiations. Silence followed for several seconds. Then Claire spoke quietly. If we say no, they will do exactly as she said. I have reviewed their finances. They possess the means to acquire controlling shares within less than 2 weeks. Alex, podkudit kak sovremeno imia, exhaled and picked up his pen. I believe we should accept. Suddenly, Uncle Raymond rose. I need a moment. He left the room. The door slammed so forcefully it made the water glasses shake. Maya leaned closer to me and quietly asked, Do you want to pause the meeting? I shook my head no, thinking they needed time to understand that the world had shifted and I was no longer little Vanessa. About 15 minutes later, Uncle Raymond came back, his expression losing its cold and sharp edge. There was something new in his gaze, a hint of exhaustion. Without uttering a single word, he pulled out a chair, sat down, grabbed the pen, and signed the document. I remained silent, nodded with respect, stood up, collected the folder, and stepped out of the room. Outside, the sun had finally broken through the clouds after an overnight rain. Bright light streamed through the tall glass windows, bouncing off the shiny stone floor. I had played my cards flawlessly. For the very first time, the Larson family was the one forced to step back. 3 weeks following the signing at Orion headquarters, the Monday financial news exploded with headlines. Cressman Industries had officially merged with Orion Strategies under a model promoting sustainable growth. The market reacted swiftly. Orion stock increased by 17% in 2 days, while Larson Holdings shares plunged. Sitting in my office, I watched the news ticker on the large screen. In the corner appeared my name for the first time on national television, Vanessa Larson, the enigmatic CEO responsible for this year's biggest business reversals. I switched off the television. For me, success was never the final goal. This was merely the start of a new chapter. A far greater change was underway. The special shareholders meeting of Larson Holdings was arranged for the very next week. For the first time ever in the company's history, a woman, myself, was put forward as a candidate for the board of directors. Not because they desired it, but because Orion's share had exceeded 31%. I entered the meeting room dressed in an ivory suit, the boardroom lighting reflecting off the glass wall behind me, creating a gentle halo effect as if the entire space had locked its attention on a single point. And indeed, it had. The expressions of the senior board members, mostly elderly men, revealed discomfort they tried to mask. Some forced courteous smiles while others looked away. However, one member was absent. Alex, the cousin who once smugly claimed he could secure me a genuine position, had recently been asked to step aside temporarily from his legal advisor role due to discovered conflicts of interest in several transactions. I did not feel victorious. I simply felt justified. When called to speak, I walked to the podium, rested my hand on the table, and stared directly into the camera broadcasting live to thousands of shareholders. We will no longer function under obsolete methods. Buy cheaply, sell dearly, dismantle, then leave. From this day forward, Larson Holdings will serve as a foundation for investment, rejuvenation, and revival. We will not merely purchase companies, we will support them to become self-sufficient, and I am here to guarantee that. I returned from the podium to scattered applause that steadily grew into a hearty ovation. The situation was slightly uncomfortable, yet impossible to ignore. The distribution of influence was changing. Claire, my cousin, who had once seriously doubted me, sent an email to apologize. It was brief, simply stating, "You were right, and you achieved what no one imagined could happen. I hope to learn from you someday." I read her words, saved the message in my memory folder, and chose not to reply. Uncle Raymond, however, stayed completely quiet. I understood it would not be easy for him to accept failure, especially when it came at the hands of someone he once considered a mere shadow on the sidelines. The last time we crossed paths at an industry gathering, he only gave me a nod. No criticism, no patronizing, just a nod. Perhaps that was the greatest acknowledgement he could offer me. As for Patricia, the always composed aunt, she launched a campaign to restore her reputation. She appeared on a podcast featuring accomplished women, her voice calm and sweet. "I have always believed Vanessa had potential. Our family is very proud of her," she said. Unfortunately, the internet is unforgiving. Less than an hour after the podcast aired, a video from the previous year re-emerged, recorded at a family birthday party where Patricia declared plainly in front of everyone, "Vanessa, stop dreaming. You do not have the Larson business gene. That is reserved for the men." The clip went viral instantly. The hashtag #ThisIsTheRealPatricia trended throughout the night. Aunt Patricia was forced to cancel all media engagements, remove her personal social media profiles, and avoid any public appearances. 2 months later, Henry, the youngest cousin, asked to meet me at a cafe in Lincoln Park. He presented a proposal for a joint venture, an investment division within Orion aimed at startups founded by women. It appeared admirable, yet I noticed the ambition burning in his eyes. Henry never pursued anything without personal gain. I took a slow sip of my coffee and met his gaze directly. Orion was not designed to dominate. We created it to share value, but only with those who genuinely embrace that vision. You are not prepared. Standing up, I left the bill and my brief refusal before walking away. Behind me, Henry sat quietly. His usual boldness vanished for the first time. There was no need for me to conquer them. Their arrogance and prejudice caused them to stumble on their own. Justice does not always come with a gavel. Sometimes it arrives when those who once ignored you are compelled to hear and, in my situation, to understand. 3 months after that pivotal shareholder gathering, my life shifted into an entirely new direction. No more concealing myself under anonymity. No longer pretending to be merely an assistant or a silent participant in boardrooms. I, Vanessa Larson, was now acknowledged not only as the strategist behind Orion's success, but also as a symbol for women previously overlooked and dismissed for not fitting the conventional image. Invitations for interviews, partnership proposals, panel discussions, they flooded in like a tidal wave. Yet, I did not accept them indiscriminately. Instead, I selected thoughtfully because I knew I did not need to be a public figure. I had to be genuine, a voice for hopes that had once fallen silent and then gently sparked anew. The Business Innovation Awards ceremony in Washington, D.C. was among the rare occasions I chose to attend. The early summer evening presented a flawlessly clear sky, with the Grand Hall's lights gleaming against the glass like a dream brought to life. Holding the plaque for Strategic Business Innovator of the year 2025, I stepped onto the stage amid roaring applause. Facing hundreds of attentive eyes, I inhaled deeply and began to speak. Precisely 10 years ago, those I called family mocked me when I mentioned starting a consulting company. They said I was fantasizing, suggesting I start in archives or focus on marriage instead of business. I followed their counsel, but on my own terms. I paused briefly as soft laughter rippled through the audience. Starting from a modest office above a phone repair shop, I quietly absorbed what was around me, gradually building what you now recognize as achievement. Yet to me, accomplishment is not measured by figures or trophies. It is when a college senior sends me a message saying they didn't believe they could do it until they saw my example. It is when someone who used to be an assistant enters a boardroom now as a leader. The hall fell silent, then erupted into sustained applause. After the ceremony, I was invited to speak at more than a dozen universities and organizations led by women entrepreneurs. I shared my journey not to boast, but to be sincere. I spoke openly about the times I felt like giving up. Alone in the quiet nights, surrounded by reports, I reflected on the moments I declined opportunities simply because I did not feel prepared to step forward. In return, I witnessed the glimmer of hope in their eyes, something I once believed I would never have the chance to inspire. Several weeks later, an envelope of pale brown tone arrived without any return address. It bore only a single handwritten line, "Vanessa, for your eyes exclusively." Inside, I found Uncle Raymond's letter of resignation. The message was concise, just a single page, yet every word caused me to pause and reflect deeply. "Vanessa, I once thought I understood everything. I believed business revolved around power, speed, and control. However, you have shown me a different way, one that is wiser and more compassionate. I am stepping down from the Larson Holdings board. It is time for people like you to lead the next generation. I misjudged you, and for that, I am truly sorry." Folding the letter, I sat silently in my office, my hand wrapped around my coffee cup. Not because emotions overwhelmed me, but because I realized that genuine change had begun. This change was not only within myself, but also inside the very system that once confined me. I did not keep the letter as a trophy. Instead, I carefully placed it inside the first page of Orion's New Generation Strategy Journal as a lasting reminder. Justice does not always arrive through loud proclamations, but often through a quiet, sincere, handwritten note arriving just at the right moment from someone you believed would never transform. A few weeks afterward, I led the inaugural meeting of the Next Foundation, a venture fund dedicated to supporting women-led businesses throughout the Midwest. Seated beside me were former assistants, ready to embrace the future together. Teachers, nurses, single mothers, and women who had never imagined themselves as leaders before. Now they stood as trailblazers. I observed them and then reflected on my own path. I realized that my true legacy is not the company I created. It is the freedom I leave behind for those who follow, the freedom to dream, to start over, and to trust that no one has the authority to tell them they cannot succeed. I was once the most underestimated woman in my own family, judged as inadequate simply because I chose a different direction. Yet that very rejection fueled me quietly to build an empire from the ground up. Now I have no need to prove anything anymore. I share this story just to remind you that sometimes strength is not granted by opportunity, but forged by creating it when no one else believes you can. What are your thoughts on Vanessa's journey and how she triumphed over her family's disapproval? Leave your comments down below and be sure to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring true stories about family and perseverance.